Good morning to you all, and I bring you warm greetings from New Delhi. It's a great pleasure for me to be talking to you today, but I feel a little bad that I have to use this medium to talk to you or communicate with you. I wish I was also part of this conference, and I know for sure that this conference is deliberating on a topic which is very crucial, very important for the future of agriculture, for the future of food, and of course for the future of sustainable development. Having said that, let's be clear, only a few days back, or a couple of weeks back, Norman Borlaug passed away. With that passed away an era of modern agriculture. And agriculture from where the world hasn't drawn any lessons. In fact, we have gone much deeper into a trap which was laid out about 40 years back when Green Revolution was introduced in developing countries, starting from Mexico, India, and of course, covered parts of Asia, parts of Latin America, and left by and large Africa. Now, the last 40 years, what has happened? What has transformed agriculture? I think it's quite obvious to all of us. I don't have to illustrate it, but let me still point a couple of salient or let's say outstanding issues that I thought I should bring it on the table. The impetus or the thrust on chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and the hybrid varieties, including the hybrid varieties, has done tremendous damage to agriculture in the developing world. We know for sure that in India, for instance, where we have had about 200,000 farmers committing suicide in the last 15 years or so, and about 40% of the farmers wanting to quit agriculture if given a choice. The development crisis is the outcome of the negative impact or the deleterious impact of the Green Revolution technology. The technology has essentially done damage by way of destroying the natural resource base. And once the natural resource base is destroyed, whether it's a sick soil or the water table getting very low, water mining taking place, pesticides contaminating the environment, the human food chain and so on, we are in crisis. And that is quite borne out by what is being demonstrated by the farmers, not only in India, but in much of the world now. Now, at the same time when we were witnessing a terrible crisis emanating from Green Revolution technology or the Green Revolution model of agriculture, there was a kind of emphasis which we ignored, and that was a emphasis or the march towards changing the climate pattern, changing or adding on to the global climate debate. There have been ample debates, and I'm sure my distinguished colleagues on this panel are going to talk about it, that roughly the estimates vary from 18 to 25% is the impact on global warming from agriculture alone. And much of it, as you all know, is coming from chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and the hybrid varieties that we have been using. Now, have we drawn any lessons from this? Well, I think we'll come back later, but let me now move on to another area. While Green Revolution was at its peak, we witnessed all over the world a renewed thrust on boosting trade. And as you all know, after the 2007-2008 food crisis, and also the economic meltdown that the world is witnessing and has still not emerged out of it now, or even after spending $20 trillion to meet the exigency, the fact of the matter is that we are fast moving into an arena where they are going to compound the crisis that we have already created. The World Trade Organization, which emerged in 1995 and has now completed about 14 years, has been on the forefront of adding on to the destruction from agriculture. Now, when I say agriculture, let's be very clear. When we introduce agriculture into international trade, it's quite obvious you're not going to do agriculture on bullock carts and so on. You need to apply fossil fuel to actually trade for more for economic benefits or for whatever you call it, for economic growth of the world. But the fact of the matter is, look at the irony that today the world is discussing, if you look at internationally, there are two major agreements that are being deliberated all over the world. One, of course, is international trade, what is called as free trade. The other one, of course, is the fight over global warming. Now, isn't it ironical that both these treaties are actually contradictory to each other? Because global climate change, they are not discussing the role of trade in climate change. And when it comes to trade, they are not discussing the role that it will play into activating the crisis by way of global warming. So we are all sure that where the world is moving towards it, they want to make a fast buck out of it, whether it's climate aberrations or whether it is agriculture or by way of trade. Nobody is actually interested in sustainable development. And as my friend Walden Bello has said very clearly and categorically, that if you really want to address the issue of climate change, you have to hit at or you have to address the issue of economic growth. The model of economic growth that we are witnessing all over the world, which I call as a violent economics, is actually at the base of all this crisis that we witness today, whether it's in the case of food or agriculture, and also in the case of climate change. Now, over the last 14 years, the WTO, as I said, has only added on to the woes of the farmers in the developing world. Now, let's look at what is on table now. If the Doha Development Round completes the way it is supposed to complete soon, then I can tell you my understanding is that a study which PANAP had done some years back and which has elaborated and said categorically brought out something which is very important. There are only 149 or so third world countries which have been classified as third world countries in this world. 105 of these countries have actually become food importing countries in the last 30 years. My worry is that if the Doha Development Round comes into place, the remaining of the third world countries will also become food importing countries. Which means the world will be divided into two parts. One part of the world, which is the OECD countries, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, will be the food providers. And the developing world, whether it is third world countries or the emerging economies or whatever you call it, all these countries will be standing always with the banking power in their hand. So this is the way the world is now projected in the era or in the future that we are now going to witness. If at all the WTO comes into place the way it has been designed. Why I am worried is because if you look at what is on the table now, developing countries have been given two protection mechanisms or measures. One is special products, the other one is special safeguard measures. So let's be very clear. DST, if you look at it, what is on the table now, only 12% of your tariff lines can be quote-unquote protected, of which only 5% of the tariff lines have to escape any tariff cut, which means, as Pascal Lamy had said a couple of years back at the Hong Kong Ministerial, that special product is a kind of a carrot that is dangling before developing countries. And developing countries negotiators, let's be very clear, are too keen to grab the carrot. They don't even want to understand what the implications are in store for farmers and for agriculture. The second safeguard measure that we are talking about is too complex. It's not going to make any worthwhile sense for developing countries. Although there is a debate going on whether it should be, whether this surge rate should be 140% or 130%, it does not matter. Because by the time you calculate all these kinds of things, the damage would have been done. In fact, the last talk that failed in July 2008, it was very obvious, and if you remember, I had written there very clearly that it was basically not the opposition put up by India by way of special safeguard measures that broke the talk, but actually it was the next target or the next point on the agenda, which was the issue of cotton subsidies of America. America didn't want to take a chance to reduce their cotton subsidies. It would have been politically suicidal for the government to do so. So therefore they shifted the blame to India. And India rocked home because the then Commerce Minister knew there was a political mileage he could drive out of this kind of message, that he is becoming a savior of developing countries' farmers. Actually, he had agreed to the special safeguard measures that was carried out by European Union in that particular meeting, the talks that failed. Now, it's quite obvious that if we have to proceed on this framework, we are in for trouble. But that trouble, of course, we all know is going to hit at us. But more importantly is, in the light of all this, will it be impacting or worsening the kind of agriculture that we have been doing all these years, all these ages? Well, my answer is no. It's very simple. If you look at any developing country for that matter, not only India or Malaysia or any other country, we are faced with a terrible assault from all directions on agriculture. One, it is the corporate takeover of agriculture. All over in the developing world, the emphasis is on to ensure that the farmers are pushed out of agriculture. The WTO is only going to hasten that process. And the idea is that agriculture should go into the hands of corporates. Now, let me give you a couple of examples here. When WTO began, in 1995. And if you look at if you have seen my study, which tries to analyze what has happened in the first 10 years of WTO as far as agriculture is concerned, I very clearly brought out on a global study that only the gainers from the first 10 years of negotiations were essentially America and the European Union. And of course, I'm including Canada, Australia, and so on. But if you take a framework, then I would say European Union and America were the two biggest gainers. They were the gainers. And if you look at the developing world, most of the developing world or developing countries have actually become food importing countries. Now, what does it mean? Since 1995, we have seen a new phenomena all over the world. This is a strange sign that we find that farmers of one country are now pitted against farmers of another country. It's like the farmers of Indonesia are now worried about imports from India. Indian farmers are worried about cheaper rice imports that may come from Indonesia. Indian farmers are worried about cheaper oilseed imports or what is called as palm oil imports from Indonesia and Malaysia. So our farmers in India are actually paying the price for a large cheaper import from Malaysia and Indonesia of palm oil. And these imports are increasing. Now what happens is, Indian farmers are worried about farmers from Malaysia and Indonesia. Similarly, Malaysia and Indonesia farmers are worried about farmers from America, from farmers of China, because they're going to dump in cheaper imports. So basically what has happened is, farmers of one country are now pitted against the farmers of another country. So this process is actually the outcome of WTO. WTO has ensured that the farmers now become a warring class. Now why? And it's very obvious. Because WTO is basically pushing a corporate agenda. Now, if the corporates have to succeed, it has to ensure that the farmers are decimated. And that can only happen if you put the farmers of one country against the farmer of another country. So we see a phenomenon which is quite unique, which has started only after WTO came into place. And I think now it is happening all over. Whether it is the Korean farmers who are worried about imports from China, or whether it's the Chinese farmers who are worried about imports from America, whether it's the American farmers or the American apple growers worried about the imports from China, this process has only, in the days to come, will be worsened, or it will make life difficult for the farmers. So when the corporates know, when the farmers are fighting, at least the farmers of one country will give way to the farmers of another, and that makes it easier for the corporate march to go on. Now, as I was saying earlier, this is actually a model of development which comes from America. So when America talks about agriculture, it talks about corporations, it talks about machines, because that's what agriculture is engaged with. When India or the developing world talks about agriculture, we are talking about human beings, we are talking about subsistence farmers. And I think that's the kind of paradox that we must understand. So therefore there is a conflict between the rich countries, the OECD countries, with their population power on one hand, and the multitude of human beings on the other hand, all living in developing countries. So it is obvious this conflict is going to worsen in the days to come. And the world has begun to accept the American model of agriculture, which means farmers are no longer required if you have to economically grow, which I think is a flawed basis, which is actually the fundamental or the major reason for the kind of economic crisis as well as for the climate crisis that we witness today in the world. So it is very obvious that we actually, by following this economic growth model, or what I call as the buoyant economic model, are actually adding on to both the food crisis as well as to the climate crisis that we witness. Now, after the world food crisis that we witnessed in 2008, and of course the economic meltdown that followed, the financial institutions, as well as the people who have the hedge funds with them, have realized that the financial mobility is not going to be that economical, or not going to be that yielding into profits. Now it is very strange phenomenon that the world is witnessing, and which is backed by the corporate, is of course that you try to go into land grabbing in different countries in the name of producing food. Now this is a strange phenomenon which has taken roots after, or let's say it has gained strength after the food crisis, especially the Middle East countries began to realize that they had the money, but there was no food available off the shelf anywhere in the world. So you have to ensure that for difficult times ahead, you start producing or start ensuring that you produce food or outsource food for your own people. So what is being done today is that countries like Saudi Arabia, China, or Oman, or for many of those Middle East countries, and also countries like India, Brazil, and the big players, are now moving on scouting for land, most of the African countries, most of the Latin American countries, even including our neighborhood in Pakistan, they are trying to buy huge tracts of land or take out on lease and then grow crops which will be shipped back to the country. To me, this is what is called neocolonism. This corporate takeover of agriculture is really very worrisome. It's a dastardly act that is going to be witnessed in the days to come. And I shudder to think where the world is heading towards. Ladies and gentlemen, 30 million hectares is the amount of land that has, or the area of land that has actually been already given on lease to these corporates or to the countries. Which means, and I'm worried, if you look at it, I'll just give you an example to illustrate. When we had the Irish potato famine roughly about 200 years back in Ireland, I remember still when I went for the 150 years of commemorative year and I delivered one of those presidential addresses there. I remember the mayor of the city saying in his inaugural address, he said, what kind of a barbaric society was living at that time in Ireland? When people were dying of starvation in Ireland, food or corn actually was being loaded onto ships for UK. Imagine today the kind of barbaric society that is living today. In all those countries, people are living in hunger, and yet companies are coming, getting into intensive farming systems, which will add on to global warming and will bring in corporate control. People will die in those countries, whereas that food will be shipped to the domestic population. Look at Saudi Arabia trying to snatch 500,000 hectares in Pakistan. Look at Ethiopia. There are 8,000 companies trying to buy or compete with each other to buy land in Ethiopia, and there are 5 million people who are living in hunger in Ethiopia. Is that the model that the world should follow? I think it is very clear. The role and response of corporates to the issue of food crisis and climate change is actually not to address this crisis to make it towards or move towards sustainable development, but it's actually to ensure that you try to strengthen more of corporate control, push farmers out, and then ensure that food actually becomes a kind of a completely monopolized or under the control of three kinds of companies. The food producing companies, the Monsanto and Syngenta, the second, the trading companies, the ADM and Cargill, and third, supermarkets, Walmart and Tesco. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, they are also heading towards convergence. Another 10 years, you will see food will be produced in food factories, future food factories. You don't require farmers, you don't require land. That is where the world is heading. One of the universities in America has already developed a prototype of the future food factory. The World Bank is trying to find out how and why it can be subsidized. And I'm sure all our countries, whether we are in Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines or in India, our government, being more learned as they can, will adopt that model of agriculture. It is basically an exit policy for farmers. Farmers all over the world have now to be pushed out of agriculture. They have become a burden of the society and nation. Thank you very much.